In our hurry to give a very elusive and immersive experience in our story, we try to refrain from explaining the why of things. Hey guys, Fifi Mangaka here. Show, don't tell. I know we're all absolutely sick and tired of hearing this overused piece of writing advice. Every time I watch something or hear somebody, even myself, say, show, don't tell, I honestly roll my eyes a little bit. I think we kind of all do. Regardless of that fact, it's still one of the most important pieces of storytelling advice, but I think most people are actually using it wrong. Hi, I'm Fifi Mangaka, a mangaka working on my own story, Olde Treehouse, and today we're going to be talking about how you are probably using show, don't tell wrong. If you're a writer of any kind, whether that's for comics, manga, webtoon, or novels, you've undoubtedly heard this advice that you should show things, not necessarily tell them. And basically what that means is rather than going through all of the adjectives and adverbs and explicitly stating things, you should allow the audience to see them as they are. And it's a good piece of advice, but I think it's been contorted and maybe used and overused in a way that actually does more harm to your storytelling than good. I was reading a comic, and in the first chapter, I'm introduced to this character. And this character lives in a place that it's not told. The character's occupation is not told. Nothing about their background is told, but they have two friends. And these friends are a little bit odd. You know, you wouldn't expect a young character like this to have two older friends with this sort of background. It's interesting, it's weird, right? And it's not explained. Several pages, I would say 10 to 30 pages are spent kind of bolstering this relationship between the main character and these two other characters. Now, at the face, it seems perfectly fine, right? It seems like, oh, this is, world building. This is character development. You're learning more. But the whole time I'm sitting reading this, wondering why. I'm wondering, well, why is he friends with these two people? Why do they live under a bridge? What is the history here? None of that is explained the whole time that I'm reading this. And this is the first way that I think a lot of storytellers are using show, don't tell wrong. They're kind of creating a context void with the way that they use it. So what I mean by that is where you show so much and tell so little that you basically create this black hole of meaning in your story. You basically create a situation where I see everything as it's presenting, but you're kind of hoping that I'm keeping up with what's going on because of something. In comics, that something usually tends to be good art. And the biggest pitfall with contextual voids is it kind of leaves the audience questioning and wondering, well, what is the purpose of any of this? If I can't draw or lean into the reason for why any of this is going on, why these friendships are happening, what about the world causes these two characters to have to live the way that they do, it's going to make me kind of apathetic about what happens in the story. Contextual voids often pop up where you don't give the audience enough context or enough general understanding of the world that you've created for them to feel some sort of investment in the story. This one I think is really common. I see it a lot in a lot of different works. Well, how do you, remediate the fact that, well, I'm trying to show them without explicitly saying, this is this world and this is this person and this is their background. You give just enough to pique the interest of the audience. So in the example of the story that I read, have maybe a couple of panels in the manga that kind of explain what happened to those two characters that led them to living where they are underneath a bridge. Or maybe even instead of touching those characters, give some general context to the world. What is the city like? Is it one where there's a lot of economic disparity between different groups? Something that kind of helps me as a reader understand the circumstances of these characters a little bit more. Okay, so let's say contextual voids are not the problem that we have. Let's say we have a different problem with show, don't tell. Another thing that I've seen a lot of, particularly in battle manga or any sort of comic that involves action of any kind, is ambiguous power dynamic. A lot of chapter ones of mangas and comics feel like you have to really hone in on the action in order to get the audience interested. Now, I'm not disputing that by any means. I do think that if you're making a battle shonen or an action-related comic, it is important to give the audience a little bit of a taste of what the action is going to be like in your story. With that being said, there still needs to be some sort of understanding of the power dynamic in your story so that as a reader, I know what I'm getting into. If you have in your chapter one a main character that's already shelling out named moves moves and using like their most powerful move against their first enemy, and you don't even explain who that enemy is, it almost feels more like a checklist for this genre of writing than something that was a thoughtful story idea. So if you have like a random antagonist that pops in your first chapter and you have your main character fighting them and it's like super intense and you've got all those things that I said, like named moves and like crazy powered stuff happening, and the audience doesn't know why it's happening, or the audience doesn't know who this antagonist is, it can be a bit disorienting. I've even seen some circumstances where the stories start out with a major fight and it kind of just throw you into this massive fight, and there will be like 20 or 30 pages of combat and no dialogue. This is a very big example of a misuse of show don't tell to me when it comes to action and power dynamics in a story. I think if you're going to have a fighting scene, it is imperative that you tell the audience a little bit about why this is happening. You don't have to go on this like massive diatribe, but I should be able to look at this fight and kind of understand, oh, okay, my main character is fighting like the big bad of another planet, and the story is starting out with this big bad trying to destroy my main character's planet. Already that gives you like enough understanding of the power dynamics at play to maybe be a little bit more invested in what's happening. So another way that show don't tell could be ruining your story, or you could be using it wrong, is within your characters. So a lot of people who make manga or comics love to have the edgy edgelord character, and I've spoken about this archetype several times on my channel. It's one of my most loved archetypes for a character, if you can't tell, and I think that show don't tell really destroys this character if you don't use it correctly. This character that has a edgy appearance, you know, they have a silent disposition, they may be a little rude, maybe a little dark. The issue with using show don't tell on this character is they act like this with no exploration as to why. So if you're showing that this is how the character acts because they lost some loved ones, or because they grew up in a really difficult part of town, or because they had to go through some struggle, you have to at some point tell the audience this information. If you go your whole story with your edgy character just being an edgelord forever and it exists in a vacuum, it kind of borders on satirical. We want to know why this character has this kind of disposition, and don't be afraid to explain that. You know, maybe it doesn't have anything to do with a tragic backstory. Maybe it's just this is how they relate to the world around them. Then say that. Let the audience understand better how this character acts like this as a result of the environment that they're in. This is how you're going to create some kind of emotional undercurrent in the character that the audience can more easily connect with, as opposed to just creating an edgy character because you think that they are cool. Again, it kind of shows the pitfall of show don't tell, because in our hurry to give a very elusive and immersive experience in our story, we try to refrain from explaining the why of things. But I think in some cases, giving some tidbits of the why makes the character, makes the story, makes the plot even more interesting and even more immersive, particularly with character archetypes. So where does that leave us? If show don't tell has so many potentials to ruin your story, why do we use it? Why is it often spouted as one of the most common and important pieces of writing advice? Well, I think you should still use it. I think that in essence, the idea of showing and being vivid through imagery is very important for your audience to not be spoon-fed. I get that, and I think it's really something that we should internalize as storytellers. I think we should use our discernment to figure out when are the areas that we actually want to explain things to enhance the understanding or experience. Let's not assume that our audience needs to be spoon-fed. Let's assume that if we give them enough pieces that they could put the puzzle together. But we do have to give them some pieces. So as much as I absolutely hate hearing this advice, there's a part of me that still believes it's very good advice, and it's something that all writers can still internalize and use sparingly. So what do you think about show don't tell? Do you detest it? Do you love it? Do you think it's great advice? Do you think we need to throw it in the trash? I really want to know what you think about this. And if you do use it, what are some ways that you avoid from having it ruin your story or create something that's just so ambiguous that an audience will never be able to understand what's happening? Let me know as usual in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.